The Enemy by Pearless Buck. Now, Pearless Buck, if you go through her stories, you will see that generally the background is the Oriental. Oriental means the Eastern Asian countries, especially China and Japan. In most of her works and in most of her writing, she has always advocated peace. In most of the stories, you find that anti war feeling over there. In one of her stories, The Yellow Demon or something like that, I don't remember exactly the name, where the main character, an old lady, she says that why people have to fight. If they have anything, they should sit with a cup of tea and discuss it out and talk it out. So, what does this also? This shows that there was always a feeling of anti war in her stories. Now, this particular story is set in the background of Second World War, when America and Japan, they were at war, and this was the situation after the Pearl Harbor attack. Now, it is the time of the World War. An American prisoner of war is washed ashore in a dying state and is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. Now, the whole story presents a dilemma, a conflict between nationalism and humanism. Which is more important? Which is greater? And that is what this entire story presents through its protagonist, that is the Japanese doctor, Dr. Sadao Hoki. So the question, should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to army as a patriot? We find this particular thing going throughout the story. Now, Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built near the Japanese coast. Uh, as a little boy, he played there quite often. Uh, there were pine trees, and Sadao had learned how to climb them. His father would often take him to the islands of those seas. And every time he has taken the little boy to this island, he says that his father said that those islands are the stepping stones to the future of Japan. Now, the Sadao always asks this question: where shall we step from them? Where will we go from there? Father says, who knows? It cannot be predicted. But then look at the next part of the answer. And that is very important. It is also applicable in our lives also. Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. No one can limit one's own future. It totally depends upon a person, how he builds it, how he creates it, and how he designs it. So that is what it is, and it is applicable to all of us. Many a time we complain that we don't have the things and we cannot do this. But then always remember this line: who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. Now, Sada was the only son, and he always listened to his father. His father hardly played or joked with him, but he took all the pains to see that his son was well educated. That was the chief concern of Sadao's father. And this was the reason that after he had completed his studies, at the age of 22, he was sent to America for the higher studies of surgery and medicine. After 7-8 years, Sadao came back, and before his father died, he had not only become famous as a surgeon but as a scientist also. He fulfilled his father's wishes. Now, these days, he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. And that was the reason he was not sent along with the troops. And there was another reason. The reason was the general, old general, was not keeping well and he might require operation any time. Now, if the question comes, why Sadao was not sent along with the troops? So the answer will be, firstly, he was perfecting a discovery which would render the wounds completely clean, and secondly, the general was not keeping well and would require surgery anytime, operation anytime, and that was the reason Sadao was kept in Japan. Now he was standing in the veranda of his house. He was looking at the sea in front of him. And as the weather was, it was the mist which was gradually rising from the sea, and he very well knew that soon it will cover up the whole coast and then it will cover his house. And he had decided that once the mist comes near the house, that fog comes near the house, he will get inside and he will be with his family. But at this moment, the door opened and his wife, Hana, came out. Now he had met Hana in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. He met Hana, but then he did not start the relationship unless and until he was sure that she was a Japanese, because he very well knew his father, who would not accept anyone but pure of the race. And then how he met Hana? It so happened that his American professor and his wife, they were trying to be very kind to the foreign students, and they quite often invited at their house. Nobody wanted to go there. There were certain reasons, because the rooms were very small, congested, the food was not good, and above all, it was professor's wife who was very talkative, very talkative. And that's why they tried to avoid it. That day also Sadao was invited, and Sadao had already made up his mind that he would not go, but he went there, and there he found Hana. And he felt that she is the lady for him. But then, and then they continued that they did not marry in America. They came back, and according to the Japanese tradition, Sadao introduced Hana to his father, and with his consent, he married, and now he was living a happy married life with 2 kids. While he was thinking all this thing, he saw some image, some object coming out of the ocean. It was a man. He staggered a few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head, and then he was again hidden by the mist. Hana was worried. They both saw that this man was crawling, and then again they saw him falling down, and he was covered by the mist over there. Sadao thought that it was a fisherman who had a boat accident, because the place where they were living, in the vicinity, there were fishermen villages, and they both started running towards the place. While running towards that place, Sadao had one thing in his mind, that if that man has come from that part of the sea, he must have been seriously injured, because that part of the sea was covered with rocks. So he must be badly torn. And when they came, they saw that yes, the man was injured. The sand on one side of him had already stain of red soaking through. He is wounded, Sadao exclaimed. He made the haste to the man who lay motionless. An old cap stuck to his head soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garment. But as they approached the man, they hesitated, because the man who was lying over there was not a Japanese. He was a white man. And as the cap fell away from the head, his wet yellow hair blonde he was, and he was unconscious. And from here, the dilemma part of the story starts. They had come rushing over there thinking that the man must be a Japanese from the nearby village, but when they came near, they saw that it was a white man. And now the hesitation, because this was the war time. Now Sadao, he was a doctor. He immediately kneeled down. His expert fingers started probing the wound. Blood flowed freshly. Sadao observed that it was a gun wound which had been reopened. And how could he make out? Because the flesh around that wound was blackened with gunpowder. And this was a very recent wound. And maybe the rocks had reopened. Even Hana was concerned about the bleeding. This was the time when there was no one on the beach. Now there is a word used over here, beachcombers. Beachcombers are those people who come on the beach to gather the things, shell or something like that. Now the question, what shall we do with this man? But this question was going on in the mind of Sadao, but his hand, expert fingers, were trying to do so that the bleeding could be stopped. So he gathered the sea moss around and he packed the wound. The man was unconscious. He moaned with pain, but he was unconscious. Then Sadao said that the best thing would be to put him back into the sea. The bleeding was stopped. Hana also agreed because she felt that if they sheltered a white man, it would be a case of treason and they would be arrested. So they should not shelter that man, they should not help that man. And if they sheltered that man, they would be arrested. And if they handed him over, looking at his condition, it was sure that he would not survive. Hana said, yes, the kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea. But see, both of them are discussing this. But none of them is taking any steps to do anything. And then Hana asked, what is he? Who is he? So Sadao said, by his looks, he seems to be an American. And then he took up the cap. On the cap, in the faint lettering was written, U.S. Navy. And he said, yes, he is from an American warship. He is an American. The man was a prisoner of war. And Hana said, yes, most probably he has escaped and that is why he is wounded. And then he asked Hana. Hana actually said with resolution, finally deciding, can they put him back into the sea? Sadao countered the question by saying that if he is able to do, will she help him doing that? Hana said no, if he can do it alone. Sadao hesitated again. Sadao, he was a doctor. And what he says, that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. He is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. Now, see the, what you can say, the mixed feeling over here. At one side, he considers him as an enemy because he is an American. On the other hand, he is taking him up as a common man. And finally, when they could not decide, they said that they should carry him to the house. But they were concerned about the servants. Hana said that they would tell the servants that once he recovers, then they will be handing him over to the police. And that is what they should do, because Sadao should think about his position and about the children and about the family, because if they did not do so, it will be endangering everything. They lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl that had been half starved. Fowl is the bird. They carried the man to the house. They took him to the room which once upon a time was the room of his Sadao's father, and after his death it was never used. Now everything in that room was complete Japanese. The old man would never think of sitting in a foreign chair or sleeping in a foreign bed. Now here comes another question. How can you say that Sadao's father was a very, very conservative or very, very typical Japanese, hardcore Japanese? So two reasons we can give. First, Sadao did not marry Hana unless and until he was sure that she was a Japanese, because he very well knew that his father would not accept anyone other than a Japanese. And secondly, the room where Sadao's father lived, everything, furniture and all, everything was Japanese. Now they laid that person, American, in the room, and the first thing that Sadao said was that he must be cleaned. And so he said that if she could bring hot water, he will wash him. But